Subscribe now, because what you're about to read will prove that sometimes the person who challenges you professionally is the one who completes you personally. A 38-year-old cardiac surgeon from one of Poland's wealthiest families, who spent 15 years hiding behind white coats and operating room walls, watches a new resident walk into his hospital and feels something he thought he'd lost forever. Genuine connection. She's brilliant, driven by a personal tragedy that made her choose cardiology, working 18-hour days to prove she deserves to be there. He sees her destroying herself with the same perfectionism that once nearly cost him a patient's life. This story has a mentor watching his resident's hands tremble from exhaustion and making the choice to protect her from herself. A 4 a.m. confession in a tiny apartment that changes everything. The delicate dance of falling in love when professional boundaries say you shouldn't. And an ending that proves the bravest thing a surgeon can do isn't operating on someone else's heart. It's opening your own. Don't miss a single moment of this journey from professional admiration to the risk of real love. University Hospital in Krakow was one of the most prestigious in all of Poland. Dr. David Szymczak, a 38-year-old cardiac surgeon, walked through the hospital corridor with a confident stride, elegantly dressed as always under his white coat. His family belonged to the wealthiest in Małopolska, but he'd never allowed money to define his medical career. He'd worked hard for over 10 years to earn the respect he now had among colleagues and patients. It was early Monday afternoon in early October, and Krakow's sky was gray and full of heavy clouds promising rain. The temperature had dropped to just 54 degrees Fahrenheit, and the damp air reminded everyone that Polish autumn was in full swing. David had just finished a complicated operation that lasted almost 6 hours, and was heading to the conference room on the 3rd floor, where there was to be a briefing for new cardiology residents. When he entered the room, his gaze immediately fell on a young woman sitting in the 2nd row. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a simple professional bun, and her blue eyes were focused on notes before her. She wore a white coat that looked new, but her posture was calm and full of confidence. Something in her concentration was different from the other residents. She didn't look nervous or overwhelmed, just completely absorbed in the material. There were 17 new residents this year, more than usual. David sat in the 1st row next to Dr. Mark Kowalski, director of the residency program, who had been his mentor when he himself started his career almost 12 years ago. Dr. Kowalski began introducing the new doctors one by one. Each stood up, said a few words about their background and medical interests. Most came from different Polish cities: Warsaw, Wrocław, Gdańsk, Poznań. When it was the brunette from the 2nd row's turn, David involuntarily straightened in his chair. Maja Lewandowska, graduate of Jagiellonian University, finished her studies with honors and the highest average in her class. Maja moved here from Warsaw, where she worked for a year at the clinical hospital, gaining experience in emergency medicine, said Dr. Kowalski with clear recognition in his voice. Maja stood and nodded toward those gathered. Thank you. I'm glad to be part of this team. Cardiology has always been my passion, and I know this program is one of the best in the country, she said, in a calm but confident voice. David couldn't take his eyes off her. This wasn't ordinary fascination with physical appearance, though Maja was undoubtedly attractive. There was something authentic in her, something real that he hadn't seen in many young doctors consumed by ambition, prestige, and the desire for rapid advancement. In her eyes, he saw determination but also empathy, a rare combination in the world of medicine. After the presentation, all residents received schedules and assignments to various teams. David had 4 residents under his care this semester, and to his surprise, Maja was one of them. He approached the group that had gathered around the schedule board. Welcome to cardiology. This is the most difficult medical specialty, but also the most satisfying, he said in his usual professional tone, which he'd developed over the years. You'll work long hours, you'll be tired, sometimes you'll wonder if you chose correctly. But when you save your first life, when you see a patient walking out of the hospital healthy, you'll understand it's worth it. Maja looked up and their eyes met. For a moment, David felt a strange sensation, as if time had slowed. He quickly composed himself and continued. Tomorrow morning we start at 7. Please be prepared, he added. When the group began to disperse, Maja approached him. Dr. Szymczak, I wanted to say I read your articles on minimally invasive cardiac surgery techniques in the Journal of Cardiac Surgery. Very impressive approach to reducing recovery time. David was genuinely surprised. Over the last 7 years, he'd published 12 scientific articles, but most people knew his name for a completely different reason, from economic newspaper headlines about his family pharmaceutical company, which was worth hundreds of millions of zlotys. Rarely did anyone recognize him for his scientific contributions. Thank you, Dr. Lewandowska. I'm glad someone actually reads them. I thought those publications just ended up on library shelves, he replied with a slight, rare smile. Not only did I read them, I studied them in detail. The technique you described in last year's article, using three-dimensional imaging and precise intercostal incisions, could truly revolutionize how we treat valve defects. Reducing operation time by almost 40% is a significant achievement, Maya said with enthusiasm, but without excessive exaltation. David was increasingly intrigued. You're right. That's exactly what I'm working on. I want this technique to become standard, not the exception. We have too many patients waiting for operations that are too invasive and require long recovery. They would have talked longer, but Dr. Kowalski called David for a quick consultation. When he turned back, Maya was already walking down the corridor, talking with 2 other residents. Over the next 2 weeks, David noticed that Maya was everywhere he was. Not because she was following him or trying to draw attention to herself, but because she was always first at morning rounds at 6:30, last to leave after evening consultations, and consistently asked the most thoughtful, in-depth questions during case presentations. Rumors quickly began circulating in the hospital that the new resident might be the most talented young doctor to join the cardiology program in many years. David observed her work with growing admiration. Maya had a natural talent for diagnostics. She could spot subtle abnormalities in test results that others missed. But more importantly, she had something that couldn't be taught in any medical school: genuine empathy for patients. He saw how she spent an extra 5 or 10 minutes at the bedside of elderly patients, calmly explaining procedures, listening to their concerns, holding their hands when they were frightened. One rainy Thursday at the end of October, David stayed at the hospital very late, preparing for an extremely complicated operation scheduled for the next morning. It was the case of a 56-year-old man with severe mitral valve dysfunction and coexisting coronary artery disease. The operation required precise planning and coordination between several specialist teams. It was almost 10 p.m. when he left his office to finally go home. The hospital corridors were almost completely empty and quiet. Only the distant sound of medical monitors and sporadic footsteps of nurses on night shifts disturbed the silence. When he passed the conference room on the 2nd floor, he noticed the light was still on. He opened the door and saw Maya sitting alone at a large table, surrounded by stacks of medical textbooks, printed scientific articles, and notes. In front of her stood a laptop showing complicated diagrams of heart anatomy. She was already wearing regular clothes, dark jeans, and a simple gray sweater, which meant she'd finished her official shift, but had stayed of her own volition. Dr. Lewandowska, it's almost 10 p.m., David said, entering the room. Maya looked up, clearly tired. Under her eyes were delicate shadows, and her hair, which was usually carefully pinned up, now fell loosely on her shoulders. I know, Dr. Shimchak, but tomorrow I'm assisting with your operation on Mr. Kowalczyk, and I want to be absolutely prepared. It's a very complex case. David sat in a chair on the other side of the table. Outside the window, Krakow rain drummed rhythmically on the glass, and the city streets glistened with wet asphalt, illuminated by yellow street lamps. Preparation is important, absolutely. But you know what's even more important? A rested, focused mind in the operating room. Fatigue is one of the biggest dangers during surgery. I've seen it too many times. With respect, doctor, but I didn't come to Krakow to be an average resident, Maya replied with unwavering determination in her eyes, but also with a note of something else, maybe fear of failing expectations. I came here to become the best cardiologist I can be. I can't afford half-hearted preparation. David leaned forward, looking her straight in the eyes. Maya, may I call you that? When she nodded, he continued. I understand that feeling better than you think. I once worked like that too. I slept 4 hours a day. I lived in this hospital. I studied every case obsessively. I thought it was the only path to excellence. And what happened? Maya asked quietly. I almost lost a patient due to my own exhaustion. I was at the 30th hour of my shift. I was assisting with an operation and missed a subtle but critical sign of complications. Fortunately, my mentor noticed it and took control. The patient survived, but I learned the most important lesson of my career. Being the best doctor doesn't just mean knowledge and technical skills. It also means self-awareness, taking care of yourself so you can take care of others. Maya closed the textbook in front of her and sighed deeply. I feel like I constantly have to prove I deserve this place, that I belong on this team. Some other residents have connections, families of doctors, relationships. All I have is my work. David felt a sting of recognition. He knew exactly what she was talking about, though from the opposite perspective. His whole life, people had assumed his success came from family wealth, not from talent or hard work. Maya, for these 2 weeks I've been observing your work. Your diagnosis of the 23-year-old patient with myocardiopathy last Tuesday was brilliant. You noticed something that escaped 3 experienced cardiologists. Your suturing technique during the assist on Mr. Nowak's operation was precise as a doctor with 5 years experience. And most importantly, I saw how you spent an extra 20 minutes with an 86-year-old patient who was terrified of the operation. Her explained everything in language she could understand, made her feel safe. Maya looked at him with surprise. She hadn't expected such detailed observation, much less recognition. You've already proven your worth. Everyone on the team sees your talent, and I'm not just talking about technical knowledge. Your empathy, the way you combine science with a humanitarian approach to patients, that's rare and priceless, David said honestly. For the first time since he'd met her, he saw Maya's face brighten with a genuine warm smile, not the professional, polite smile she showed at the hospital, but an authentic expression of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Dr. Shimchak. That means more to me than you think, she said quietly. Please call me David. When it's just the two of us, outside the official hospital hierarchy, it can be David, he proposed, surprised by his own informality. He usually maintained strictly professional boundaries. Then Maya, when it's just the two of us, she replied with a small smile. Now Maya, please pack up all these books and go home. That's an order from a senior surgeon, he added in a joking but firm tone. Maya began gathering her things. All right, but only because I promised to be in top form tomorrow for that operation. That's all I expect, David replied. They left the conference room together and took the elevator to the ground floor. Krakow rain was now falling even harder, creating a curtain of water in the light of street lamps. Copernicus Street was almost completely empty at this hour. Only individual cars slipped carefully through the wet roadway. Where do you live? I can give you a ride, David proposed, indicating his elegant but discreet BMW parked near the hospital entrance. Maya hesitated for a moment, looking at the rain. Thank you, but I live really close, in the old town, near the small market square. It's only 15 minutes on foot, and honestly, I like walks in the rain. They help me relax and think about the day. David understood. He himself often walked around Krakow late in the evenings when the city was quiet, to organize his thoughts after stressful days at the hospital. I understand, but please be careful, and please rest tonight. I promise. Good night, David, Maya said, using his first name for the first time, which sounded strangely intimate in the empty hospital lobby. Good night, Maya. He watched through the glass doors as Maya walked away toward the old town, her silhouette gradually disappearing in the rain and darkness of Krakow's illuminated streets. For the first time in many years, maybe 7 or 8, David Shimchak felt something more than professional respect or collegial sympathy for a coworker. He couldn't yet name this feeling. He didn't want to think about it too deeply. But as he got into his car and drove toward his apartment in the elegant Salvatore district, he caught himself smiling for no specific reason, thinking about tomorrow's operation and about the fact that Maya would be with him in the operating room. The rain stopped falling somewhere before dawn, and when at 6 a.m. David returned to the hospital, Maya was already waiting, fresh, focused, and ready, and so began something neither of them had foreseen. The operation the next day was long and extremely complicated. Mitral valve replacement in a 56-year-old patient with multiple comorbidities, including coronary artery disease and high blood pressure. The procedure required not only surgical precision, but also perfect coordination between the entire operating team, which consisted of 8 people. Maya assisted David for the entire 5 hours and 40 minutes, never losing concentration or precision. Her movements were confident. She anticipated David's every move with amazing intuition, handing him appropriate instruments before he even asked for them, maintaining ideal tissue tension during suturing, watching monitors with such attention that she noticed a subtle change in the patient's heart rhythm 5 seconds before the alarm would have sounded. When the operation ended successfully and the patient was stable, David realized something unusual. He'd worked with Maya as if they'd been collaborating for many years, not just 2 weeks. There was synchronization, a chemical harmony that usually took months of joint operations to build. In the surgical changing room, when they were both removing their gowns and masks, David said, "Great work today, Dr. Lewandowska. Your precision and anticipation were at the level of an experienced surgeon." Maya smiled, clearly pleased with the recognition. "Thank you. It was a fascinating procedure. The way you repaired the valve ring damage simultaneously with leaflet replacement was exactly as you described in your 2023 article." "You read that article too?" David asked, surprised. "I read all your publications," Maya replied naturally, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. In the eye. Following 4 weeks, their professional collaboration became the main topic of conversation in the hospital. Some younger residents envied Maya's direct access to the most complicated cases and operations. Others speculated about the true nature of their relationship, whispering in corners about a possible romance between the wealthy, handsome surgeon and the talented resident from Warsaw. But the truth was simultaneously simpler and more complex. David saw in Maya something absolutely exceptional, medical talent that appears once in 10 years, maybe rarer. He felt an almost moral obligation to help her develop this enormous potential, so she wouldn't waste her gift on routine procedures and bureaucratic duties that often consumed young doctors. But there was also something more, something David didn't yet want to openly admit to himself. He liked her company. He liked the way she thought, how she asked questions that forced him to think more deeply about his own methods. He liked the rare moments when her professional mask dropped, and he saw the real person behind it. Intelligent, determined, but also sensitive and sometimes uncertain. A woman who worked hard to prove her worth in a world dominated by old hierarchies and connections. One Saturday afternoon at the end of November, when Krakow was already fully winter with temperature oscillating around 37 degrees Fahrenheit, David was reviewing patient medical records in his office. He was finally planning to leave early, maybe take a walk to Jordan Park, eat something at one of the restaurants near Main Square, disconnect from hospital reality. There was a quiet knock at the door. "Come in," David said, looking up from documents. It was Maya. She was wearing civilian clothes, dark pants, a cream sweater, and a coat draped over her arm, which meant she wasn't on official duty. "Sorry to bother you on a weekend, David, but I had a question about one of my cases, and I couldn't stop thinking about it," she said uncertainly, as if wondering whether she should have come. "You're absolutely not bothering me. I was just taking a break. Please sit," David replied, indicating a comfortable armchair on the other side of the desk. "What case is it about?" Maya sat and opened her tablet, showing medical records of a 23-year-old patient. Tomasz Adamczyk, 23 years old, computer science student at AGH University of Science and Technology. He came in with symptoms of fatigue, shortness of breath during normal physical activity, sporadic chest pains. Initial diagnosis showed left ventricular hypertrophy. For the next 25 minutes, Maya presented a detailed case analysis. Her approach was in-depth and multidimensional. She didn't just describe the medical aspects of the disease, physiological symptoms, results of all diagnostic tests, but also the emotional and social dimensions of the patient's situation. She told how Tomasz was terrified that his young life might drastically change, how he worried about his future, about the possibility of finishing his studies, about finances, because he came from a small town near Tarnów and didn't have family financial support for long treatment. "Medically, we can help him. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is difficult but manageable with appropriate treatment, but I see that his greatest suffering isn't physical. He's terrified, feels lonely, cut off from the normal life of his peers," Maya concluded. David looked at her with genuine admiration. You know what's most impressive about what you just presented? Most residents, most experienced doctors even, look only at numbers, charts, MRI images. They see the disease, not the person. You see the whole person, their body, emotions, life context, everything together. That's a rare gift. Maya looked genuinely surprised by this compliment. For a moment she appeared embarrassed but also clearly moved. I'm just trying to remember why I became a doctor. And why? David asked gently, though he intuitively sensed that behind her passion for cardiology lay some personal story. Maya hesitated, looking through the window at the gray Krakow landscape. My father died of a massive heart attack when I was 16. He was your age, 38. He was healthy, active. He worked as a history teacher at a high school in Warsaw. One evening he came home from work, sat down to dinner with us, and suddenly collapsed. The ambulance came in 12 minutes, but it was too late. David felt a sting in his heart, listening to her story. I'm very sorry, Maya. That must have been a traumatic experience for you and your whole family. It was the worst day of my life. But what's worse, over the following months and years I learned more. My father had complained to his family doctor about sporadic chest pains, about strange fatigue for the last 6 months. The doctor ordered basic tests that showed nothing alarming and said it was probably work-related stress. No one did deeper cardiac diagnostics. If someone had paid more attention, noticed the subtle signs, maybe done a stress test or more detailed examinations, maybe he'd be alive today. Maya spoke quietly but with controlled emotion. And that's why you became a cardiologist, David said, now understanding much more about her motivations, about her obsessive preparation, about why being the best mattered so much to her. Yes. My mother was left alone with 3 children, me and 2 younger brothers, who were 14 and 11 at the time. She worked 2 jobs, as an accountant during the day and a cleaner in the evenings, so all 3 of us could study, have normal lives. She literally sacrificed everything, her health, dreams, personal life. That's why I can't fail. I can't be average. She deserves for me to be the best. Maya spoke with intense determination, but also with the clear weight of enormous expectations she'd placed on herself. David stood, approached the window. For a moment he looked at the street, organizing his thoughts. Then he turned to her. Maya, your mother is already incredibly proud of you. I'm absolutely certain of that. But I need to tell you something, and please listen carefully. Your worth as a doctor, as a person, doesn't depend on being infallible or the best in every single moment. It depends on your commitment, empathy, continuous learning and growth, what you do for your patients, the way you listen to them, understand them, care for them. That already makes you an exceptional doctor. Maya looked up. Tears glistened in her eyes, which she was clearly trying to hold back. Sometimes I feel that no matter how much I do, it will never be enough to fix what happened. You can't fix the past. No one can. But every patient you save, every life you change, that's your way of honoring your father's memory, David said quietly, sincerely. For a long moment they sat in silence. Finally, Maya wiped her eyes, smiled sadly, and said, Thank you for listening. I haven't talked about this with anyone in a very long time. You can always talk to me, Maya. Not just about medicine, David replied, while wondering if he wasn't crossing some invisible professional boundary. Maya nodded, stood, and began gathering her things. I should go. I promised my mom I'd call tonight. As she was leaving, David suddenly asked, Maya, do you have any life outside this hospital? Friends in Krakow? Hobbies? Anything? Maya stopped in the doorway, turned, and smiled sadly. Honestly, not really. Me neither. David also smiled. That's kind of sad for both of us, Maya said. Or maybe we're just very dedicated doctors, David replied. Maybe both things are true? Maya waved goodbye and left. David remained alone in the office, looking at the closed door, thinking about the strange feeling that was beginning to develop in his heart. A feeling that was dangerous, inappropriate, complicated, but at the same time the most genuine thing he'd felt in a very long time. December brought true winter to Krakow. Temperature dropped to 23 degrees Fahrenheit, and streets were covered with a thin layer of snow that gave the city a magical, almost fairy tale appearance. Main Square was already decorated with Christmas illuminations, and traditional Christmas markets filled the air with the scent of mulled wine and roasted ossipek cheese. In the hospital, however, the atmosphere was extremely tense. The end of the semester was approaching, and all residents were preparing for evaluations of their progress. Maya was working even more than usual, if that was even possible, often staying at the hospital until late night hours, studying cases, reviewing operation notes, preparing presentations. David observed this with growing concern. He saw how Maya was slowly exhausting herself. The shadows under her eyes became deeper. She smiled less often. Her movements lost that natural lightness she'd had at the beginning. During one of the operations on Wednesday afternoon, he noticed her hands trembling slightly, a clear sign of overwork. After finishing the operation, he asked her to his office. "Maya, we need to talk about your work schedule," he began directly. "If it's about today's operation, I apologize for that hesitation." "It's not about that," David interrupted. "It's about the fact you've been working 18 to 20-hour days for the last 3 weeks. That's unhealthy and dangerous." Maya straightened in her chair. Her posture became defensive. "I'm managing fine. Your results are outstanding. That's not the issue. But today I saw your hands trembling. I saw how you had to concentrate for an extra 5 seconds to execute a suture you normally do automatically. You're exhausted, Maya. I only have 2 more weeks until the end of the semester. I have to show I deserve a high evaluation," she replied stubbornly. David sighed deeply. "You've already shown more than enough. Your evaluation will be the highest of the entire resident group. That's certain. But if you continue at this pace, you'll end up in the hospital as a patient, not a doctor." Maya was silent for a long moment, looking at her hands. Finally, she said quietly, "I just don't want to disappoint anyone. I don't want to disappoint you." Something in that confession, in that honesty and vulnerability, touched David deeply. He stood, approached her, and sat in the chair next to her rather than behind the desk, eliminating the formal barrier between them. "Maya, listen to me carefully. You could never, absolutely never disappoint me. You're the most talented young doctor I've had the privilege of working with in the last 10 years. But more than your medical skills, I value your empathy, your passion, your authenticity. And I don't want you to destroy all of that through excessive pressure you're placing on yourself." Maya looked up. Her blue eyes were moist. "It's hard. My whole life I've defined myself through achievements, through being the best. I don't know how to be just good enough. It's not about being good enough. It's about being yourself, about finding balance. Medicine is a marathon, not a sprint. If you burn out now, you won't be able to help patients for the next 30 or 40 years of your career," David said calmly, but with conviction. "And how do you do it? How do you find balance?" Maya asked honestly. David laughed bitterly. "Honestly, I don't do it well. I'm 40 years old. I don't have a family. I've lost contact with most of my friends from university because I was always too busy. My life is this hospital, operations, patients, research. Sometimes I wonder if this is life or just existence." It was the first such personal confession David had ever made to anyone at the hospital. Maya looked genuinely surprised by his honesty. "Why did you never get married?" she asked, then quickly added, "Sorry, that's too personal a question." "No, it's fine. The truth is I had a few relationships over the years, but none survived. The women I was with always said the same thing, that I was more dedicated to medicine than to them, that I couldn't open up emotionally, that I always put patients first. And they were right. I just never felt a strong enough connection with anyone to change my priorities." Maya nodded, understanding. "I never had a serious relationship either. In high school I was too focused on studying. In university, at medical school, a few dates here and there, but nothing real. Men quickly get bored when they see I prefer to spend Saturday evenings studying anatomy rather than at a club or cinema. Their loss," David said spontaneously, then realized how that might have sounded. Maya looked at him with curiosity. Something unspoken passed between them, a moment of electric awareness, almost tangible tension that neither was ready to name or acknowledge. David cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "In any case, going back to the topic, I want you to work a maximum of 10 hours a day for the next week. That's a medical order, not a suggestion. 10 hours is impossible. I have so many cases to review. There are many other residents too. We'll redistribute some of your responsibilities. Don't argue with me on this, Maya. "This is final," David said firmly but with concern in his voice. Maya sighed. "All right, but only because I know you're right. And one more thing," David added before he could think whether it was a good idea. "Tomorrow evening there's an Andersaki party at a restaurant near the square. Several doctors from the hospital are going. Maybe you should go? Meet people outside hospital corridors, relax a bit. I'll be there too. We can go together if you want. I mean, not together in the sense of a date, of course, but just as colleagues, so you don't feel uncomfortable in a new group," David quickly explained, feeling how stupid that sounded. Maya smiled, the first genuine smile of the day. "That would be nice. Thank you, David." The next evening, David waited in front of Pod Baranem restaurant on Grodzka Street, an elegant place known for traditional Polish cuisine and warm, cozy atmosphere. It was 14 degrees Fahrenheit, and his breath created small clouds of vapor in the cold air. He was dressed in dark pants, a navy sweater, and stylish coat, much more casual than at the hospital. Maya appeared punctually at 7:30. David almost didn't recognize her at first glance. Instead of usual hospital clothes or simple jeans, she wore an elegant dark green dress with a V-neck that subtly emphasized her figure. Her hair was down and fell in soft waves around her face, and light makeup highlighted her blue eyes. "Sorry, I hope you weren't waiting long," she said, slightly out of breath. "I just got here. You look different. I mean beautiful. David felt himself blushing, which hadn't happened to him since high school. Maya laughed. "I understand what you mean. Thank you. You also look very good without the white coat." In the restaurant, there were already a dozen doctors from the hospital. Some Maya knew superficially, others she was seeing for the first time. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, far from the formality and hierarchy of hospital corridors. Everyone talked, laughed, ate traditional Polish dishes, żurek, pierogi, bigos, and drank vodka or wine. David and Maya sat together at the end of the long table. Initially, the conversation was slightly awkward, as if neither knew how to behave in such an informal context. But after the first glass of wine, the atmosphere loosened. "Is it weird that I feel more nervous here than in the operating room?" Maya admitted quietly. "Not at all. I feel exactly the same. In the hospital, I know my role, what I should do. Here, everything is less clear," David replied honestly. They talked for the next 2 hours about everything except medicine, about their childhoods, favorite books, movies, places they'd like to visit someday. David learned that Maya loved Polish Renaissance literature, that she dreamed of visiting Japan, that her favorite film was Kieślowski's 3 Colors, Blue. Maya learned that David had played piano since childhood, that his greatest passion was Polish medieval history, that he'd always wanted to write a book, but never found the time. It was almost 11 p.m. when they left the restaurant. Snow had started falling again. Large, soft flakes danced in the light of street lamps, creating a magical scenery. "I'll walk you home," David proposed. "It's only 10 minutes from here," Maya replied. "I know, but I want to." They walked slowly through the old town streets. Their steps crunched on fresh snow. Krakow was wonderfully quiet that night. Most tourists had already returned to hotels, and locals were in their homes. In front of her building on Swałkowska Street, Maya stopped. "Thank you for tonight. I really had a good time. And thank you for everything, for support, understanding, for being not just a mentor but also a friend. Maya, David began but didn't know how to finish the sentence. They stood very close. Snow fell around them. The world seemed to have stopped. In that moment, Maya looked at him. In her eyes was something new, something that looked like a question or an invitation. David felt an irresistible desire to kiss her, to close that small space between them. But he didn't do it. Instead, he said, "You're an exceptional person, Maya, and I'm glad I met you." "Me too, David. Good night." "Good night." He watched as she entered the building, then stood there for another 5 minutes in the falling snow, wondering whether he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life by not kissing her, or perhaps avoided a professional and personal catastrophe. One thing was certain. Whatever was between them was becoming stronger, harder to ignore, more dangerous. The last 2 weeks before Christmas were the most intense period in the hospital. David and Maya worked together on 3 extremely complicated operations. Their collaboration reached a level that other doctors commented on, with admiration and envy. But between them personally was a strange tension, something unspoken, something hanging in the air since that night under the snow. Maya tried to maintain professionalism, focus exclusively on medicine. But David noticed small things. The way she avoided his gaze during lunch, how quickly she left after finishing operations, how she stopped staying after hours when she knew he'd also be at the hospital. On Friday afternoon, a week before Christmas Eve, David was asked for an urgent consultation at Provincial Hospital in Tarnow, where a young woman needed immediate heart surgery. He went there with his team, but without Maya, who had the day off. The operation was difficult and lasted almost 8 hours. The patient, a 25-year-old teacher from a small village near Tarnow, had a congenital heart defect that had suddenly worsened. As David worked, trying to repair the damaged valve, something in her age, in her youth, in the fear of her family waiting in the corridor, reminded him of Maya's story about her father. The operation succeeded. When David came out to the waiting room at 2 a.m., the girl's parents were crying with relief and gratitude. The mother squeezed his hands and said, "You saved our child. You saved our whole life. How can we thank you?" Driving back to Krakow through the cold, snowy night, David thought about Maya's words. Maybe he'd be alive today if someone had paid more attention. He thought about how medicine was often a game of chance, being in the right place with the right doctor at the right moment. But he also thought about something else, about how life was fragile, unpredictable, how each day was a gift that couldn't be wasted on fear of taking risks, on hiding behind professional barriers, on ignoring feelings that could change everything. It was almost 4 a.m. when he returned to Krakow. Instead of going home, he drove to Maya's building on Swałkowska Street. He knew it was madness, that it was the middle of the night, that she was probably sleeping, that he should wait until morning, until Monday, until the right moment. But the right moment never came if you only waited for it. He rang the intercom. After a long time, he heard Maya's sleepy voice. "Yes? Maya, it's David. I'm sorry to call at this hour, but I need to talk to you." Silence for a few seconds. Then, "Come up. 3rd floor, door on the right." When she opened the door, she was wearing regular pajamas and a thick sweater. Her hair was messy, face without makeup, eyes sleepy, and she was the most beautiful woman David had ever seen. "What happened? Is there a problem at the hospital?" she asked with concern. "No. I was in Tarnow for an emergency operation, but everything went well. The patient survived," David replied, suddenly feeling uncertain. "Can I come in?" Maya stepped back, letting him into the small but cozy apartment. It was modestly furnished, simple furniture, some medical books on shelves, a photo of her family on the dresser, a small table by the window with a view of snow-covered roofs of the old town. "Sit down, I'll make coffee," Maya said, still looking confused by his late-night visit. "I don't need coffee. I need to talk to you about something important." David sat on the small couch. His heart was beating, faster than during the most stressful operations. Maya sat across from him in an armchair, wrapping herself tighter in her sweater. "What do you want to talk about at 4 in the morning?" David took a deep breath. "When I was operating on that young woman in Tarnow today, I thought about what you told me about your father, about how life can end in one moment, without warning, without a second chance. And I thought about how I've spent the last 15 years hiding behind work, behind professionalism, behind fear of being vulnerable. David, I don't understand where this is going." "Maya, for the last 3 months since I met you, something has changed. I can't stop thinking about you, not just as a talented resident or promising doctor. I think about you as a woman who made me feel alive, happy, full of hope for the first time in a very long time. I think about your smile, about the way you wrinkle your nose when you concentrate, about your laugh, about how you are with patience, about everything." Maya looked at him with wide eyes. Her breathing became faster. "I know this complicates everything. I know I'm your mentor, that there's a 10-year age difference between us, that people will gossip, that it could affect your career. I know all the rational reasons why I shouldn't be here, shouldn't be telling you this. But tonight I understood that life is too short to live only by rational rules," David said quickly, as if afraid that if he stopped, he'd lose courage. "And I know you might not feel the same. Maybe for you I'm just a mentor, older colleague. If that's the case, I'll say I'm sorry. I'll leave. We'll pretend this conversation never happened. We'll maintain our professional relationship. But I had to tell you the truth, because if I don't, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Silence filled the small room. David heard the ticking of a clock on the wall, distant sounds of the city waking to life, his own accelerated heartbeat. Finally, Maya spoke. Her voice was quiet but confident. Do you think I didn't notice how you look at me? Do you think I don't feel that electric tension every time we're close in the operating room? David, I think about you all the time too. When I study, when I work, when I try to fall asleep. But I was afraid to say anything because you're this great renowned surgeon and I'm just a resident. I thought for you I was just another young doctor. David stood, approached her, knelt by the armchair so they were at the same level. You were never just another young doctor. From day one you were someone exceptional. Maya reached out, touched his face gently. But how will this work? We work together. You're my superior. I won't be your direct mentor anymore. We'll talk to Dr. Kowalski. We'll transfer you to another team after the new year. That will mean we'll work together less often, but our personal lives will be separate from professional. It will be more appropriate. David had already thought about all this during the long drive from Tarnow. And what will people say? Hospital gossip. People will always gossip. But if our feeling is real, if we're happy together, does it really matter what others think? David took her hand in his. Maya, I don't expect an immediate answer. I'm not asking for anything specific now. I just want to know if there's a chance. Can we try to see where this leads? Maya closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, they were full of tears, but also something else. Hope, happiness, relief. Yes, I want to try. I've been afraid of this for the last few weeks, but now that you've said it out loud, I realize that's exactly what I want. David felt an enormous weight lift from his heart. Slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, he leaned in and kissed her gently. Maya responded to the kiss, her arms wrapped around his neck, and for a long moment, nothing else mattered. Not the hospital, not careers, not gossip, not the past or future. Only this moment, only the two of them. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. What now? Maya asked. Now I'll let you sleep, because it's almost 5 a.m. and we both need rest. But tomorrow, if you want, maybe we could go on a real date. Not as mentor and resident, not as work colleagues, but as David and Maya. Two people who want to get to know each other better, he proposed. That sounds perfect. 3 months later, in March, when Krakow spring was beginning to melt the last remnants of winter, Maya gave her final presentation as a first-year resident. Her grades were the highest in the history of the cardiology program, and Dr. Kowalski publicly congratulated her on outstanding achievements. David sat in the last row of the conference room, watching her with pride. Their relationship had stopped being a secret after the new year. Initially, there were rumors, whispers, some unpleasant comments. But when everyone saw that Maya was now working under another mentor's guidance, that her evaluations were based purely on merit, that nothing in their professional behavior was inappropriate, most criticism quieted. That evening they celebrated in a small restaurant by the Vistula River. Maya wore the same dark green V-neck dress she'd worn during their first unofficial outing. Do you sometimes think about that night when you showed up at my door at 4 a.m.? Maya asked, holding his hand on the table. All the time. It was the bravest thing I ever did. And the best decision of my life, David replied honestly. You know what's funny? My whole life I thought I had to sacrifice everything. Love, personal happiness, normalcy, to be a good doctor. But with you I discovered I can have both. That I can be a wonderful cardiologist, and at the same time, be a happy woman in love with a wonderful man. And I discovered that medicine, though it's my passion, doesn't have to be my whole life. That you can be a dedicated surgeon and at the same time have someone to share joys and sorrows with, who understands the pressure, the stress, but also the satisfaction of saving lives, David said. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Looking at the Vistula flowing calmly under the restaurant windows, at the city that had become their shared home, at the woman who had changed his life, David Simchak thought about how unpredictable life was, how sometimes the greatest happiness comes from places we least expect. Maya Lewandowska, a young resident from Warsaw who'd come to Krakow to prove her worth as a doctor, had found not only career and professional recognition, but also love and partnership with someone who saw in her not just medical talent, but a genuine, exceptional person. And they both knew this was just the beginning of their shared story. A story of two doctors who learned that the greatest courage isn't just saving others' hearts in the operating room, but also opening your own heart to love, risk, and the possibility of true happiness. If this story moved you, remember, the person who sees your exhaustion and tells you to rest isn't undermining your ambition. They're protecting your future. Share this with someone who needs to hear that working yourself to collapse doesn't prove dedication, that accepting help isn't weakness but wisdom, that the right mentor doesn't just teach you medicine but reminds you you're human, and that sometimes love finds you in the last place you'd look, in the one person who understands exactly why you can't stop. Subscribe if you believe in mentors who care about the whole person, not just the resident, in 4 a.m. confessions that change everything, in love that respects professional boundaries while crossing every other line, and in the radical idea that you can be brilliant at your career and deeply loved. Because sometimes all it takes is one exhausted night in a conference room, one surgeon brave enough to show up at dawn, and the courage to admit that the person challenging you professionally might be the one completing you personally.